Welcome back to the home front. I'm your host, Reed Galen. Today, I'm once again joined by journalist Abigail Tracy. We are going to discuss, Abby, why people like Donald Trump and the people around him do what they do. And I think it's important, there's that old expression, Abby, knowledge is power. And I think, although some of us have been talking about this stuff for so long since Donald Trump came down the escalator, and that's going to be like, in 50 years, that'll be the word of the day. Came down the escalator, right? Like it will mean something bigger than it means now. But, there's this idea of if strategy means figuring out how to corner the bear and tactics means how to kill the bear, I think we need to go one level higher and understand what the bear is, why it does, what it's likely to do. And only then, once you understand the nature of the bear, and I'll stop with this metaphor, can you figure out, how you're going to go after it. But I think it's, now here we are, we're recording this on Thursday. Folks will probably hear it on Saturday. We're almost 3 weeks into this, and every day is sort of a new, like, oh my God, can you believe it? And, you're there behind enemy lines. What's the sense there? Because I'm befuddled, bemused, and frustrated by the idea that people still don't understand, like, that the fire hose of bullshit is sort of the point.
I guess like one of the questions right now is like, do we have bear spray? Like, honestly, I think when you think about it, what are the actual options? And the reality is there aren't many. Like, there aren't many, I'm not going to murder this analogy into the ground, but like, Democrats don't have much bear spray right now. The tank is a little bit on empty. And I think one of the things right now is if you look at Congress and what they can do, they can, spew rhetoric, they can preach, they can say these things, they can condemn. But in reality, like, they really don't necessarily have the tools to stop it after this past election cycle and sort of the shifting in power. So it was. And I think one of the things that people need to focus on right now is this notion and this idea that things are at the state level and people need to pay attention to what is going on in the states, because this is what Republicans are pushing. They say more states power, like this should be up to the states, this should be up to them. And I think that's one of the really important things. It's like, listen to what you're hearing, and we should be paying attention right now, I think, to Democratic governors, Democratic AGs, individuals who are fighting against these things and trying to protect individuals in their states.
Well, I think that's right. And J.B. Pritzker, the governor of Illinois, has been doing that. And, I think he has the advantage of being both the governor of a large state and a billionaire. Right.
Yeah,
so
he's rich.
He's
so
very rich. So he probably, he sees, he is financially, no one's a financial peer of Elon Musk, but the rest of them are, he's financial peers with these people. Right. So like the idea of being ruined financially because he's standing up to them is not something that an otherwise, quote unquote, normal politician who came up through the ranks and got elected governor, at $190,000 a year. Right. Like it's a different thing. But let me go back to a couple of things you said. One on what the Democrats have done, what they could have done, what they should have done. So, a couple of days ago, Brian Schatz, Democratic senator from Hawaii, said he was going to start to put a hold on Trump's nominees in response to Elon Musk sort of rolling around D.C. with a battle axe. And to me, this is one of those things that's frustrating is, why weren't you doing this like January 19th? Why weren't you doing this from the get-go? I mean, you knew that Pete Hegseth was unqualified. You could have put a hold on him. You know that Kash Patel is both unqualified and looking for retribution at the FBI. You can put a hold on him. And I think this is where this old school thinking that does not exist anymore, well, that if we are the obstructionists, right, then they can say, look, they're obstructing. And you should say, yes, we might not be able to stop the dump truck, Abby, but we're going to slow it down as much as we can. And I think that's one thing that they missed the boat on, is that, you should have been doing this before a lot of these people got confirmed. Now it's too late. Now you can say, okay, we're going to stop X, Y, or Z. Great. But that's one thing that history has shown us and this is not going to surprise you, Abby, but I'm listening to a book about Joseph Stalin right now, is that...
Cool choice. I would prefer fiction in this moment.
Right.
Yeah, cool choice.
But of course, me, it's always light reading for me. Stalin's looking across Europe in the late 1930s, and he realizes like Hitler's doing all the crazy stuff he does, but the democracies don't have what it takes, right, in that moment. And that's often a democracy's lament, which is once they get their feet under them, they are, at least throughout history, unstoppable. The problem is that it takes them a long time to sort of get organized, to get their feet underneath them and figure out where they're going to go from there. I think that's also the problem of the Democratic Party. Okay, yes, they're leaderless. Yes, they're listless. But to your point, like, they have to make a decision, which is, do you really want to slow these things down? Do you really want to provide the opposition that half the country is looking for? Or do you want to protect the things you have? Do you want to say, well, when the time came, we were the good soldiers. We were the ones standing up for process. When, again, clearly the American people voted for chaos, not process. The American people voted for this. And, people say, oh, well, he didn't get 50% of the popular vote. No, not in the count, but how many people stayed home, right? Each of those counts as half a vote for him. And I don't think we should deny that. And I don't think that our Democratic friends should deny the fact that Donald Trump is president because members of their party chose not to appear, right? Yeah. And I think that's one thing that, look, kick and scream and, oh, we should be nicer to Democrats. Okay, but like, there's this idea of like the moral mountain, right? Which is like, if you're going to live on the moral mountain and everything you do is right and everything else anybody else does is wrong, and their criticizing or analysis of you goes by the wayside because you know better, like, that's not how you build relationships. That's not how you maintain relationships. That's not how you repair relationships. And now, Democrats have about 15 million relationships they got to prepare.
Well, I think one of the, kind of to rewind the tape a little bit, I think one of the key things to think about right now is Democrats continue to be interested in governing and trying to keep a government afloat right now. And the reality is the Republican Party and some of the most vocal members of it have no interest in governing right now. You look at a Jim Jordan, right? Relatively, obviously I live in DC and, I'm knee deep in this bullshit. Can I swear? But I'm knee deep in this bullshit. But the reality is Jim Jordan might be a household name to so many people, has never passed a substantive piece of legislation the entire time he's ever been in office. These individuals do not care about governing. And right now, Democrats and Republicans are trying to play by different rules. Yes. And I think ultimately, like, Democrats in this moment need to figure out, okay, what game are you playing? Are you playing their game or are you playing your game? And like, which one is actually winning for you? Because right now it's not going well. And the reality is like, this notion of bipartisanship and this notion of, getting things done and all of the above, it's kind of comes down to what rules is the other team playing by? And like,
if they're playing by any rules at all.
Exactly. And it's like, what rules are they playing by? And if they're not playing by any rules, then stop playing by the rules. Right. And I think like that's been sort of one of the very frustrating things to watch is just sort of, they threw out the playbook. They threw out the rules. There is no referee. And at a certain point, it's like the high road doesn't exist.
Right. And I would say that my friend Trygve Olsen has 7 rules for dealing with autocrats, which I'm going to do a series on over the next couple of weeks, guys. I'm going to go through all 7 of them. But the first one, Abby, to your point, is play the game you're in, not the one you're used to or the one you want to. And I think that's exactly the point that you're discussing, which is, I don't know if you've ever seen, this is an old reference, if you've ever seen the movie Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
Of course.
But there's a point where, the Black Knight, right, he's at the bridge and King Arthur, chops off his arm. Oh, it's just a flesh wound. Chops off a leg, chops off, and before you know it, like, he doesn't have any arms or legs. And he's like, come back, I'll bite your ankles off, right? But like, that feels a little bit about like, come on, guys, right? Like, you gotta.
The to continue your analogy, the Democratic Party right now is just banging two coconuts together.
Right, they're not actually riding a horse. And so let's go back to where I started and let's describe the bears. I posted on Substack and something I'll put in the show notes today, guys, about what we've seen over the first couple of weeks. And there's been all this massive hyper attention, Abby, paid to the idea of DEI and how it must be erased from government, erased from society, the concept of it, right, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion, I believe. Maybe at another time it might have been called affirmative action, right? And why do they do this, right? They blamed a tragic, horrific plane crash on DEI. Of course, it had nothing to do with DEI, but we should understand, why do they use that? Well, there's a couple of reasons, guys, and I think it's important to understand the prisms by which I think the Trump people, Abby, are looking at this. One is the average voter. Does the average voter understand anything about what's going on? Do they care? If they understand, are they opposed to it? And so, with DEI, what they have found is that Republicans have been so good at this over the years, which is, it's like the coffee cup at the Starbucks in Missouri. That kicks off the war on Christmas, right? One little thing is cherry picked and then blown up. DEI is the same thing. But remember, before DEI, it was critical race theory. Before critical race theory, it was Willie Horton. Before Willie Horton, it was welfare queens. It was predators in the 90s. It's all coded language, and they just changed the code words to update the outrage, if that makes sense. And it could be gender, it could be race, whatever it is, but just keeping people distracted and angry. And then, of course, our friends on the left are complicit, not because they want to be, but because it's their nature. It's like, no, of course it wasn't DEI. How could you say that? How could you say that? And the talking heads go crazy. Can you believe he said this thing? And of course, now, the conversation, the game is being played on their turf again, right? Because that's the way this stuff works. And for me, the method in the madness is this, that DEI does not stand for diversity, equity, inclusion anymore. It now stands for dehumanization, exclusion, and isolation. It means that these are the others. These are the people that the Trump regime, the Trump administration wants to say are less than. It's okay to feel like they don't deserve equality. They don't deserve a fair shot. They are lesser than you. And that is the whole point of this. And I say this not as a defense of DEI as a policy prescription one way or the other, but as an extension of the idea that this is how autocrats work. This is not new. The playbook gets updated and is homegrown in every way, but it only has so many plays in it, and this is usually the first one. Overwhelm your opponents with all sorts of action, then start the othering process, and then if you take in something like a USAID, why does that matter? One, because most Americans probably don't know what USAID is. If they knew it spent $40 billion on foreign aid, maybe they'd be okay, maybe they wouldn't. But then again, they cherry pick those particular programs, right, which seem odd, might even be odd, but to the average person go, wait, why are we spending this money on those people, right? Because there was a guy, I'll find the piece on Substack that shows Gen Zers of both liberal and conservative persuasions are like, I want more money spent here, less money spent overseas. And then you have the Democrats outside screaming not about the overwhelming good that the United States, the United States can do as a hegemon, but that now we should not do this. Or it's a process argument. They don't have the right to do this. Only Congress can do this, right? So they're not even making a moral argument about the greatness of the United States. They're making a process argument that nobody cares about. And before you know it, the argument is over why are we spending $5 million on sending condoms to Gaza, right? When we didn't send $5 million to Gaza in Palestine, we spent $5 million on condoms to go to someplace in Africa as part of PEPFAR, which has saved millions of lives, which was a program of George W. Bush. And see, that's how they do it, which is the bear tells you all the things that are going to make you angry, but it's all to other people. And the last piece I'll say, and then I want to get your reaction, is there is a very particular reason why there have been photos released or video allowed to be taken of undocumented immigrants being marched into Air Force aircraft in shackles, both at the wrist and the ankles. Again, it goes back to the idea of dehumanization. It makes these people into animals. It makes them into objects instead of subjects. And this is the whole idea. Because if someone is animalistic, if someone is no longer seen as human, Abby, then it is easy for the regime, in this case the Trump people, to further convince you, an individual, that those people shouldn't have rights. They're not as good as you. You shouldn't worry about what happens to them.
So many responses. Number one, let's kill the bear analogy. We're done. We're done with that. But what I will say is, particularly on USAID, one of my best friends worked there, and I spent time with her the other night, and seeing her reaction to what happened to the organization and the Trump administration gutting it was very difficult. She was verklempt. Like, she was very worried about it and very scared and getting all these messages from her friends. And like, the reality is like, back to this notion of American hegemony. Like, this idea that we are the best country in the world that so many people hold is also rooted in the fact that like, we are helping others, and like, we are using our economic strength and economic success to help other countries and like to lift up a global civilization. And that sounds like a very weird thing to say, this idea of like better than, but the
but we're the
reality
empire. We're the empire.
We are. And so the notion that people think that we can exist in this mold as the best country without helping others and without extending humanitarian aid and without reaching out to different countries and aiding them with our success is baloney. Otherwise, you're just the rich dude that never donates to charity. Like, that is who you are. And I think it's really important that people recognize that these things matter. And it might sound strange to like the American person that we're giving out these funds to other countries and, aid across the world. But the reality is like, that is why we are great. Because we are doing these things, because we are, an economic leader, but also helping lift others up across the world. And the fact of the matter is like, what is happening right now is a winnowing and an erosion of our actual identity and success as a country by stripping away things like USAID. And that's my 2 cents, my 2 pennies on it. And maybe I'm a bleeding heart liberal, but like, that is what I will say.
Well, so I was talking to a historian friend of mine yesterday, and I said, if you went back through your studies, have you ever found a superpower who intentionally gave its own power away and created a multipolar world, one in which they were not in control, to take a purely like realpolitik view of it? And he said, I don't know that if I was sitting at Vladimir Putin's desk or Xi Jinping's desk, I could have outlined it better than what we're doing to ourselves. And that's really true because, and I was listening to a British podcast, The Rest is Politics, and one of the hosts was outlining, some countries, USAID is a substantial portion of their annual budget, right? Their annual budget for all the things they're going to do. Right? So pick a country. It doesn't matter which one. Let's say that 50% of their annual budget flows from USAID, literally USAID, not USAID, or maybe both. Now they have half the money they had. Well, half the things are going to happen that were supposed to happen. Maybe they can make up for it here or there. But the truth is they're going to go looking for somebody else. If you're a small country with not a lot of resources at your disposal, but you're trying to climb from one economic rung to the next for your people, you look away from Washington, D.C., and you look to Beijing and you say, hey, look, I'm short $85 million. And the Chinese are like, okay, here you go. Right. And now you've completely shifted the polarity of relationships. Canada, I just saw a story, is figuring out how it can start to ship oil to China because they don't necessarily want to ship it here. Well, China needs a hell of a lot of oil, right? It needs a hell of a lot of petroleum products. And so that is one thing that ultimately will and this is where these things often occur, is they will have long-term downstream effects for individual Americans. It could take years, right? But it's going to happen. And I think that's the other part, is what we're seeing from the Trump administration is like, they don't care, right? This is all a means to an end. Divide, conquer, right? When people kick and scream, laugh at them. But also, this is a place where I don't think we've ever been as a country before, Abby, which is, given the nature of what the Supreme Court said about Donald Trump last summer, that anything he did is a quote unquote official act, he is relieved from the possibility of prosecution. You mix that with his ability to blanket pardon anybody, right? It's very hard to see how there's ever accountability for any of these people, because he could just wave his magic, he could wave his pardon wand and say, voila, right? And so that gets back to what you're talking about, is, okay, where do you have power that you can exercise, and what do you do with it? And so it could be Brian Schatz from Hawaii putting holds on people. It could be J.B. Pritzker, but it has to be those places where people can take action. And let me just say this, for all of the people who might be listening to this who went out and marched, I'm glad you did. If it was a release valve for you, a relief for you to get out and feel like you were doing something, I'm glad you did it. Right now, we need to find some more substantive, tangible work to do to create more of those communities where people are coming together to say no. Because until and unless that happens, right, this is going to continue. But we shouldn't be under any illusion, Abby, that if you and I are talking a year from today, right, we're less than 3 weeks into this. If we're talking a year from today, it's going to be worse, guys. Like, we're in for it. So there's the what do we do now, but also how do we protect ourselves? Not to say you should be blind, not to say you should be deaf, but also understanding that so much of this is rooted in exhaustion and making you run around in circles until you just say, no more, I'm dispirited.
Well, and Reed, so we spent a couple days with your team in Chicago recently, and you said a line where it's like, guy of your age, he's either into smoking meats or World War II, right?
Right.
Was that what you said?
Yep.
You're pretty into World War II. And so what I'll say, and I don't know like what your brisket game is like, but anyway, we'll focus on the World War II thing.
I'm more of a pork guy than a brisket guy.
Interesting choice. We'll discuss that offline. But so I think one of the things is, when you think about World War II and the role that America played in that war, imagine if we had this mentality that President Trump is currently projecting to the world. Like, there is no way that he would have signed up America to end that war. And the reality is like, there were horrors. It was terrible. It needed to be ended. But sort of this idea of isolation and selfishness and sort of trying to turn back the page on globalization, which like you cannot do it, is wild. But it's just like, if you think about if Trump were president during that moment, who knows what would have happened? And that is a very scary thought. And I don't know what your thoughts are, you big UW.
Yeah, no, well, think about this. I mean, remember that when France fell in the spring and summer of 1940, Churchill's calling Roosevelt. Here we go. Calling Roosevelt saying, send me whatever you got. And Roosevelt's like, I can't, right? I don't have the votes. And eventually, they got Lend-Lease passed, but that was basically the idea of, you give us these bases, we're going to give you these old destroyers. And that was all for convoy duty. But let's go to December 7th, 1941. Japan attacks. Roosevelt goes to Congress and asks for a declaration of war against Japan, not Germany. And it was Hitler's blunder. He brought the U.S. into the war. He declared war on the U.S. And once that happened, then Roosevelt had, he was fair game. He's like, let's go. Right. And then they, the Joint Chiefs agreed to a Europe first peace because Germany's on the march in.
I told you guys he was in a World War II.
In the Soviet Union, and it was going to take us a minute to get the Pacific Fleet back together, yada, yada, yada. Anyway, the point is that, Charles Lindbergh, there was a big movement called America First, who said, this is not our war. These are not our enemies, right? They wanted to be in league with Germany. They would have been fine telling Britain, make a deal or you're on your own, right? Like they would have been fine with that. And that was, again, Hitler and Mussolini were fascists. These people had fascistic tendencies. And so, yeah, a lot of this stuff is probably not completely analogous to that, but maybe more analogous to, say, a Francisco Franco in Spain, where it's like, I'm going to do what I'm going to do because I want to be in charge. And the religious zealots and the rich guys are going to do what they're going to do. And if I got to throw 200,000 or 300,000 people into mass graves to make sure everybody understands what's going on, I'm fine with that, right? And so that's why I bring all this stuff up, because you think about the quote from the German theologian Martin Niemöller, and this goes back to my whole idea about DEI and dehumanization, right? First, they came for the socialists, but I didn't speak up because I wasn't a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, but I didn't speak up because I wasn't a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, but I didn't speak up because I wasn't a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak up, right? Like, that's what happens. And so there's a part of this where every voice does matter. And even if in this moment, right, the action we want to take is us just explaining and keeping that torch lit, that doesn't feel like enough, but that doesn't make it not crucial, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, 100%. And I think, like, the thing right now is it feels as though we're at an inflection point, and you want, the individuals who are going to lead you toward humanity and kindness. And I think what we're seeing is the opposite. It's, individuals seeking power and control. And that's a very scary place to be as a country. And I know that's like bleak and dark and all of the above, but what is it? What's the phrase? If you don't pay attention to history, it's bound to repeat itself.
Yeah, I mean, there's another one, which is history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme, right? Which is right.
Yeah.
I mean, and again, there's a great movie called The Holdovers. Came out a couple of Christmases ago with Paul Giamatti, and he's this very crusty professor who gets stuck at this boarding school over Christmas. Maybe I see something of myself in him, but he takes
You
his
love
kid.
Paul Giamatti. I can tell you just love Paul Giamatti.
I love
like
Paul Giamatti. And listen, and for the
you
older
love Billions. You love all of the Paul Giamattis.
I never watched Billions, but Sideways is a great movie. But I also loved his dad, Bart Giamatti, who when I was a kid was commissioner of Major League Baseball when I was a baseball nut.
Calm down.
But he takes the kid, one of the kids he's looking after, to a museum, I think in Boston. And like the kid's like, you see all this stuff? And he said, Mr. So-and-so, there's nothing new in human history. And that's one thing that our individual and collective memories have become so short that we have seen all these things before. They're different, of course, because there's different dynamics, but it all sort of stems from the same thing. And to make it a very simple equation, what we're seeing now has happened previously, which is you have an emboldened and well-resourced and relentless right wing mixed with a feckless left added to an apathetic middle. And this is what you get. And so the problem is that it took us a long time to dig the hole we're in. You don't just like grow wings and fly out of it. You've got to start to build the ladder out one rung at a time while somebody's throwing rocks at you, in the meantime. And so there's a lot of work to be done, but I think it's important to understand why we're here, who we're up against, why they do the things they do. Trump doesn't do anything really that's not pushing an open door, right? He wants to do things that are, relatively speaking, easy. You saw when, in the first week when they did that cockamamie memo that said cut all spending, right? They had to back off of that because they're like, oh God, like people got to get their Social Security checks, right? So like he's crazy up to a point. What he's allowing Musk to do, he's fine with, because if you want to let somebody be a battering ram, why not let the wealthiest guy in the world, who's also incredibly litigious and owns his own media network, be the guy? Right? If you have the authority to do these things because nobody can stop you, because the judiciary, they're going to issue injunctions or whatever, but like they're not going to listen. Congress is prostrate, both Republicans and Democrats. Take all the turf you can while you can, because at some point, one, they will slow down. They'll run into roadblocks that none of us can see. And secondly, just as we've seen throughout history, right? It could take weeks or months to take vast chunks of territory. It takes years to get it back. Going back to my World War II, right? The Germans invaded June of 1941, in Operation Barbarossa into the Soviet Union, right? It took the Soviets 4 years to get all the way back to Berlin, right? Think about that. And so the fight back is hard, it's arduous. And to your point about like what comes next, who comes next, there are leaders out there that we don't know about yet. And you know what? They're probably not politicians. They're probably people like, I've seen a couple of things on TikTok. There's a mom, I think, out of Portland, Oregon, right? She's like, her thing is running, right? She's got like 250,000 followers and she talks about politics. And she said, if you don't want to talk politics, don't come here. There's an older guy I saw who does something every day where he explains, here's how the Constitution works in bite-sized pieces. There's a friend of mine here in Utah, right? She explains how things work. She's a professor very clearly. I just interviewed a guy who I found on TikTok, right? He's got like 150,000 followers on TikTok. He's a high school history teacher, right? And he explains history in 1.5, 2.5 minute pieces that are very engaging because he tells a story. He paints the picture. And so a lot of the people out there, a lot of the voices, they already exist. We've just got to find them and elevate them and tell the old guard, frankly, you had your shot. You're living on your moral mountain.
Emphasis on old.
Right?
Emphasis on old. They're definitely old.
But there's also, but look, tell me where the kids are too. Right? I mean, we need them. This is their world, right? This is your world, Abby, right? Like we've done a lot to screw it up, right? A lot. I saw something the other day. I know I'm off on a tangent. That something like in the last 20 years, it now costs the average salary to buy a home, right, has quadrupled from something like $37,000 a year to like $130,000 a year. Right? Like that means that I don't know what percentage of the population makes $130,000 a year. It's probably maybe 10%, right? But that means that you're telling 90% of the country, whatever hopes you had of buying a home, putting down roots, finding some security, like, sorry, you're out. Like that doesn't build long-term political, economic, or societal stability either.
Yeah, I would love some equity in my world. Frankly. But no, I think there's like this like, look, if Donald Trump can become president, anybody can run for office.
Anything is possible, yes.
Anything is possible. And I think there are so many good people out there that would make great members of their school boards or Congress or, state legislatures. Like I think it's really important that people recognize that anything is possible, and if you care, that is a way to make a difference. I don't know.
Well, no, I mean but again, that's where we have to say, okay, let's open your aperture into what's happening in the world, but close your aperture on those things immediately around you so that you can find something. I love to talk in metaphors, right? How to eat the elephant one bite at a time, right? Find a bite of the elephant that you can.
Ew, I don't like that metaphor. Nobody should be eating,
Well, that's why it's a metaphor. Like, I don't want to eat an elephant either, but you understand the point.
There's something else. Just be like a big plate of pasta.
All right. How do you eat a big plate of pasta? One bite at a time.
Yeah, there you go.
So I think that those are the things. I know we're a little bit all over the place, but I feel like we're all a little bit all over the place, right? We're all a little bit at sea. And I think that's the other part too, is that it's okay to feel this way, right? It's okay to feel this way so long as feeling this way does not lead to paralysis, does not lead to hopelessness. You should be realistic. And I can understand, because I'm sorting through it myself right now, Abby, like cynicism and realism sometimes overlap, right? That does happen. Those streams do cross. But at some point you have to, try and wrench cynicism out of it. Well, of course this is happening. Look, with the Trump people, if you expect the worst from them, you'll never be disappointed. But once you understand that, it's sort of, okay, I have to accept that for the reality it is. I don't have to accept that it's okay, if that makes sense.
Yes. No, it makes perfect sense. And I think the thing is you have to accept the reality to decide to make change. Because if you're not accepting the reality, then what are you really going to try to work toward to change? Which sounds silly, and that sounded like a word salad of like nonsense. But the reality is, that's the reality.
Yeah, well, no, I mean that
Cancel
again,
me. Cancel me right now.
I think we're over cancel culture almost, not completely, but I think that we're getting closer to it. I mean, to your point, like if Donald Trump can get elected president, really? All right, so let's look forward a little bit. Again, we're going to come up with different as Abby noted, the team at the union, we got together last week to discuss the plans forward. We'll have more to say about that. But what I would say for now, guys, is keep the faith, right? Keep that candle lit, no matter how hard it is. It is okay to put the phone down. It is okay to stop doom scrolling. It is okay to go out and get fresh air. I promise you, the hour you spend not on Apple News or Blue Sky or whatever will be eminently better for you mentally, physically, emotionally than any more bad news that you can consume, right? We're not meant for this, and we should not subject ourselves to it. And I do appreciate Abby and to everybody listening and watching, you guys allowing me to ramble philosophically today. It's a little bit different, but I hope it served the purpose. Abby, do you have any plans for the Super Bowl?
No. Kind of. Maybe. I don't know.
No, kind of, maybe.
I mean, I have a lot of options. I just haven't decided upon which one.
Oh, okay. So it's not that you don't have plans. It's that you are trying to figure out.
Just too many plans.
All right. Well, as an old friend of mine likes to say, indecision is the key to flexibility. So
What is Reed, hot fire, feet to the fire. What is your favorite Super Bowl snack? Like food.
a chili, Texas chili without
Ugh.
beans.
We've already
Without
had a conversation about
beans,
chili.
everybody. Texas chili does not have
Ew.
beans in it, but you can do one of two
Do
things.
better than that. Do
No,
better than that.
first of all, you know what? I'm about to throw you right off this podcast. There's a couple of ways you can consume Texas chili. Two of my favorite. One is called Frito pie, where you actually go get a bag of Fritos, you dump the Fritos into your bowl, and you put the chili on top of it. Or you can get a piece
Walking
of corn,
taco, kind of.
and then it's not the same. Or you can get a piece of cornbread and put it on there, and then put the chili on top. And of course, you've got your cheese, your onions, jalapenos, whatever the case might be. But I will be making chili for a friend is having a party. Will you be rooting for the Chiefs or the Eagles?
The Eagles.
Well, I'm rooting for the Chiefs because I can't root for the Eagles because I grew up in Washington, D.C. till I was 15 when we were winning Super Bowls there. And then I went to high school in Dallas where they kept winning Super Bowls there. And the Eagles were always the worst. And I have been to a game. It was a baseball game, admittedly, Abby, at the old Veterans Stadium where the people sitting around me actually did throw batteries at the opposing team's players. And so I have never forgotten that as a young, impressionable mind.
So, couple of thoughts. That's why I'm rooting for the Eagles, because it's like I wish I grew up in a franchise where like you cared that much and like the Eagles fans care that much.
They do.
And so that is what I would like to be. Community. We're all about building sense of community. Also, for listeners out there, if you want from Minnesota, so like Queen of Dips, what you can do is take a pie plate, put cream cheese on it, cover it with chili, and then cheddar cheese. Look at Reed's face right now. And cheddar cheese, and you bake it in the oven, and it is the best dip you'll ever have in your life.
All right, I may edit that out. No, I will say this in closing. I was in Pennsylvania a couple of times during the fall last year, and either the day of or the day before game day in Philadelphia and its environs, everybody had their green on. And one day I was at Pitt at the University of Pittsburgh, and all the kids from Philadelphia had their green on too. So you are absolutely right. They are proud of their team. They are proud of their town. And something to your point, maybe we should think about. All right, Abby, before I let everybody escape this fever dream of an episode, where can people find you online?
On Twitter, or previously known as Twitter, I'm at Abigail Tracy, and on Instagram, I'm at Abby Tracy.
All right, gang. As always, you can find me on Twitter and TikTok and says.us at Reed Galen, on Threads and Instagram at Reed_Galen USA. Substack, guys, please subscribe. The home front at Substack. Also here Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you're watching or listening, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, hit that 5-star review button. Everybody else, please go to jointheunion.us. As we noted, we're getting a lot of stuff moving. We need your help. We're going to have a lot to do. We got a long time to make it happen. Always, everybody, thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.